what is reflexive rationality? That's my talk. And reflexive rationality is a label I think I have coined. It come across me in other writings, so it's my label. And in fact, it's also the title of my Reinhard Koselleck project, which started 4 years ago and will go on for another year. So, as I said, I report research funded by the Deutsche Forschungsgemeinschaft. And so I would like to explain to you, not the entire project, because that has many branches, but one important strand is what I would like to tell you of that, explain to you. So, but I should start by explaining what I mean by reflexive and reflexive rationality. In philosophy, the term reflexive indicates that something is somehow related to itself. In the present case, it means that I'm thinking about myself, about my own attitudes or mental states. That means linguistically that we speak of descriptions of higher order attitudes. For instance, I believe that, and so on, or I believe that I desire this and that. So these are reflexive statements in the relevant sense. So it seems when I speak of reflexive rationality, it seems that I'm heading for a piece of over-intellectualization. So somehow rationality seems to consist in taking a reflexive stance to one's own attitudes, as if we would do that all the time, or would be engaged in such reflection, which we are, of course, are not. And still we can be rational without taking this reflexive attitude. In any case, empirically minded scientists like psychologists or economists would prefer to abstain from such over-intellectualization and from formalizing these reflexive attitudes. But I don't think so that I'm engaged in over-intellectualization. I would really like to explain that, because what is rationality? Well, the theory of rationality is primarily a normative theory, in my view. And the first axiom of which is you ought to be rational. Well, that's the first norm of the rationality theory. Of course, you have to spell out what this exactly means. There are substantial norms, for instance, thou shalt not kill, and formal norms. Thou shalt not believe a logical contradiction. And both kinds of norms come in a categorical and in a hypothetical or conditional form. For instance, if you desire P and desire Q, you should desire P and Q. That would be a hypothetical formal norm. And all kinds of norms may or may not be accepted, like you shall climb Mount Everest. I guess that's a norm no one in this room accepts. And then, of course, our ongoing normative dispute is about which norms to accept. So we have normative discussions all the time, and values that's the same kind of thing. So when speaking of norm and values, we are speaking of the same thing in my view. Only norms are expressed in a qualitative language and values in a quantitative language. But both are united by having that direction of fit from us to the world. So in the perspective of norms and values, it is the world which somehow has to take a form as we say it should take. But in any case, rationality, in my view, is only about formal norms. You shall climb Mount Everest is not a norm of rationality, but thou shalt not believe a logical contradiction is a norm of rationality. And therefore, I would very briefly simply say rationality is the normative structure of our mind. So that's my definition of rationality, so to speak. And then it's tautological. You say you ought to obey the normative structure of our mind, or your mind. Of course, you ought to obey the norms which obtain. But we have an ongoing discussion. What exactly are those norms? And that's not decided up to the present day. So we have an ongoing discussion about which norms to accept, also about which formal norms to accept. The established rationality theories are not fixed and stable. And then, in my view, there can't be any over-intellectualization, because the first thing is to state the contents of the normative point of view. And then it's a second question, whether we can live up to the norms we have found. And often we cannot fully live up to the norms. And then the question is, what's the second best? How can we at least approach the norms? But the first thing is to state what the normative point of view says. So that's my business. And the empirical adequacy, I could give long talks about that as well, but that's a secondary aspect for me. My interest is just in stating the normative theory of rationality. And as I said, that's not fixed. That's a lot to do. And indeed, if my project is justified, then what we know as the theories of practical rationality are very incomplete. Okay, so of course, I don't want to talk about rationality in general, but more specifically about practical rationality. And that concerns the rationality of our actions. Or rather, not only of single actions, but of action plans or strategies. What is a strategy? Well, it consists of a set of conditional statements. So it's of that form. If C1 happens, I do A1. If C2 happens, I do A2, and so on. And a strategy may have many stages. If C1 happens, I do A1. And if B1 happens, then I'll do B1, and so on. So strategy may have many stages. This formula, and that's how you find that in textbooks everywhere, that kind of explanation. This formulation suggests that with a strategy, I make myself depend on external conditions, and that's how we usually state that strategy. But of course, I can't do so directly. I can do so only when I learn which of the possible conditions obtains. If I don't learn whether C1 has happened or not, I don't know whether now I should continue with doing A1 or not. That is, I can directly respond only to my changed information state. But if we agree to that, then that obviously leads to a vastly generalized notion of a strategy. A strategy responds then to arbitrary changes of my mind. That is to epistemic and optative or motivational, arbitrary changes of my mental state, that is of my epistemic and optative or motivational state. There's no unified term for the volitional state. So that's another term we have for that. Instead of epistemic, I should more carefully say doxastic, but I don't care. That is, strategies thus generalized are reflexive statements. If I am in such a mental state, then I will do this and this. And hence I call the move to consider such strategies reflexive assent. Here's a graphic representation. Standard decision and game theory assume action nodes, squares, and chance nodes, circles, arranging them in various structures, usually in decision and game trees, but I prefer so-called influence diagrams where the nodes represent variables and not single events. So, diese Worte spricht, der gehört mir nicht hin. Der geht jetzt irgendwie da reingerutscht in die Folie. Egal, aber stört sie nicht. Ja? Okay. So here happens something, here happens something, and that the arrows are causal arrows, signifying causal influence. So here happens something that causes something to happen here, and that has an influence on my action. And then my action has consequences, this one, but it also is followed by another action of mine. and of course, that action influences that action because I still know when I'm doing that action what I've done in the past, and that means that chance node has also an influence on that, and so on. Yeah, and then there are consequences, and then so it's these kinds of graphs we are dealing here with. But that's the standard representation with action nodes and chance nodes. And what I propose is that we have to amend this by a third kind of variable, for which I use triangles, and which I call decision variables, and which represent the possible decision-relevant mental states of the agent. That is what is collected there. There's first his conceptual scheme, yeah, how he structures his decision situation, and then his beliefs about that so structured decision situation and his utilities about his so structured decision situations. Right? And so now we have the picture, the same picture as before, amended by triangles. So then again, it's really, I observe here this chance node, this chance variable, what's going on there, that influences my epistemic state in that decision situation, possible decision situation, which is in that triangle. Of course, my action then really depends only on that triangle, on the decision situation I am in. Yeah? And that was not explicit before. And then again, these three things, my decision situation and my action and a further chance node influences my second decision situation, which may be this or that, depending on what happens, goes on in these variables. Again, that influences or determines my second action in that second action node, and so on. Okay. So we have this, and the terminology is a bit confusing. That is, in the standard textbooks, there people usually speak of chance nodes, as I do here as well, but then they also talk of choice nodes or decision nodes. And what they mean thereby are the action, what I call action nodes. And the decision nodes, in my sense, are not modeled at all in the standard theory. Yeah? They have the whole thing is to represent a decision variable, yeah. But the decision, the mental states themselves are not here in the model, yeah. And that's the crucial difference. Yeah? So when I talk of decision variables, only in my sense and not in the standard sense, yeah, where this just means action nodes. Okay, the theory of these reflexive decision graphs is what I call reflexive decision and games theory. It is my specific proposal for accounting of reflexive rationality, or what I call that. But this entails a very rich program. For instance, it opens the wide field of what I call anticipatory rationality, and standard strategic thinking is part of it. If this and this happens, then I do this and this, and then I evaluate the various strategies and have an optimization criteria for those strategies. But what if I foresee not to learn, but to forget this or that, or to undergo any other kind of epistemic change? How to rationally behave in view of that? That's a question which I do not find answered in standard textbook. Yeah? Can I prepare for getting something? Yeah, of course I can prepare. Yeah? What is the rational thing to do? But that's not treated in standard textbook. But it's a part of what I call anticipatory rationality. Or what if I change my utilities not due to information but intrinsically? This is an ubiquitous phenomenon. It is treated in economics under the label endogenous preference change, but marginally in a way. It's not a really central field in economics, and without consent. So it's not quite clear what to do about it. So to provide a rational decision rule for all these cases belongs to the theory of anticipatory rationality too. Yeah? And it seems clear that we can get a systematic grip on that only through that reflexive assembly. But I don't want to talk about that branch. I only wanted to mention the field of anticipatory rationality. I rather want to turn to another branch, what I call ancillary rationality. That's what I want to treat in the rest of my talk, namely, and that is, as I can see, totally neglected in the decision and game theory literature. So the point is, there's a lot of amendments to the standard theory which you find in the textbooks. And that amendment is utterly consequential, and particularly for games theory, as I will explain at the end of my talk. Well, so action variables are directly causally influenced only by decision variables. That was already part of the sample graph I gave you. Yeah? So my mental state causes my actions, and every other influence on my actions must run through my mental state. But do decision variables causally influence only action variables? No. Decision variables may have chance variables as side or ancillary effects. This phenomenon can get into perspective only after reflexive assent. Yeah? If you don't have the decision variable in the picture, yeah, you can't have that arrow in the picture. That causal error. That's the reason why it was hitherto neglected. But are such ancillary effects a relevant phenomenon? It seems that the direct influence of our mental states on the world is negligible. The influence predominantly runs via our actions. That's natural. Yeah? However, I think this is true only for the natural world. Yeah? It is profoundly false for the social world. Yeah? The trees are not receptive for our mental state. Well, some people say so. I don't believe it. Trees, dogs, animals are also not receptive for our mental states. Dogs, perhaps dogs to some extent, or horses, I'm told. So I have no experiences for this. But as I said, it's profoundly fast for the social world. We are skilled, permanent, mutual mind readers via mimics, gestures, linguistic behavior, and so on, which is often only partly or not at all under the control of our intentions. We permanently express our emotions, which are indicative of our desires and beliefs. Yeah, so that's what I call a direct influence of our mental states on the social world, and not via my actions. We find persons which are very controlled. Yeah? We find them kind of eerie. Yeah? When we have to infer what they think and want. Yeah? And if we can infer that only via their actions, these are strange people. And all the other way of expressing ourselves also belong to our existence. So due to such mind reading, decision variables have such ancillary effects, mainly on other persons or players in the game theoretic terminology. And are these ancillary effects decision relevant? Yes, that's the next point. And I want to explain that with the famous toxin puzzle. Yeah? It's a very artificial example for an ancillary effect, purged from all impurities. But philosophers like that kind of examples, because it's very artificial, but the crucial point stands out more clearly as in real life examples. So what is that? So you have an offer today, yeah? So by some crazy millionaire who has a wonderful machine, a so-called cerebroscope. Yeah? So you are offered the following offer. Yeah? If you manage to form an intention by midnight, an intention to drink a glass of toxin the other day, then you get a reward of €1,000 or €1 million, whatever. And the toxin, if you drink that, it makes you feel uncomfortable for a few hours, really sick. But after a few hours, the effect is gone without any after effect. So definitely you don't like to drink the toxin, but you do like to earn the $1,000 or the $1 million or whatever it is. The point is, you are now with that cerebroscope, and that cerebroscope reads whether you have managed to form the intention by midnight. And it's only the intention that is rewarded, not the drinking of the toxin. That's the point. But if you manage, if the cerebroscope says, oh yes, you have formed that intention, then you get by bank transfer your reward. And what you do the other day is unimportant. That doesn't matter. Yeah? But you sense the problem here. Yeah? So how can you ever form that intention? How can you get the reward? It seems that it is impossible. Yeah? Because the other day you are standing for the toxin. You have no reason anymore to drink that toxin. Either the cerebroscope has read your intention or has not. Anyway, so drinking the toxin doesn't do anything anymore. Yeah? So and then, if that's so, how to form the intention at midnight? Well, you already know the other day you don't have any motive to drink that toxin. So and therefore I have two different graphs. So that's the cerebroscope reading on that. That determines what the reward is. And then you might either have the early decision or a late decision when you're standing before the toxin. Here's your action of the action variable, drinking or not drinking the toxin, and that's for feeling bad or not feeling bad, the variable. Okay, so if you are decided early, you get the reward. The cerebral reads that. But if you are decided late, then the cerebroscope reads that as well, that you will be decided only late, and you don't get the reward. Okay. Can you be decided twice? Not really. I mean, if you already think, oh, I will be decided only late, then you can't be decided already here. If you are decided already here, that means you don't open a second decision node later on and decide again. If you leave open the possibility to decide again, you are not decided at the first time. And the cerebroscope knows that, it reads that, some apparently perfectly. So in my view, I don't want to engage into the discussion of that. It's really vexing. But I just claim the only rational solution of the puzzle is to be decided early, get the reward, not to reconsider. As I said, if there were a late decision, there would be no early decision and no reward. So not to reconsider, drink the toxin and feeling bad for a little while, because you prefer the reward to the feeling bad. And of course, the puzzle is generated by the insinuation that it would be impossible to be committed early, to prevent reconsideration, and thus to get the reward. There's a temptation to reconsider, but we can resist this temptation, and the early decision must include the intention to resist. Of course, the cerebroscope is perfect science fiction. However, it is only a perfected version of our general mind reading capacities, which are an ubiquitous human capability in practice. So my interest now is to identify the decision rule behind that, and what I call the only rational solution, not to argue for that rational solution. We may do this afterwards. My idealized picture, which can be weakened afterwards, is in the agent's intentional picture. Intention and intended action are tightly, indeed necessarily connected. For the external observer, there's only a causal and hence defeasible connection, but not for the agent herself. Once the agent has an intention, it cannot be an open question for her whether or not she performs the intended action. Cannot be an open question whether she performs the intended action. Hence, if the mental state concluding in this intention has ancillary effects, it is as if the intended action itself had those effects. That's the point. So that's the decision graph with the decision node. Here's the decision node. Here's the cerebroscope reading. Here's the reward, and here's the acting node. And if that decision node tells is necessarily connected with a relevant action here on the action node, then it is as if the whole thing were represented by the right graph. It is as if the action itself caused the cerebroscope reading. Of course, it does not actually cause it, but But in the intentional picture, it doesn't make a difference for the agent, yeah? Whether he decides according to that graph or decides according to that graph. And now the point is, if we accept that, we have a decision rule for this kind of graph. Now, that's an ordinary causal decision graph, for which we have then our causal decision theory or whatever. So we have a decision rule for the right graph. The only unusual item of which is that as if causal dependence, which does not amount to assuming real backwards causation. Yeah? Of course, we don't assume that. Yeah? It's an as if causation. Yeah? But and this as if causal dependence manifests in the probabilistic dependence. So the conditional probability of drinking the toxin, of getting the reward given I drink the toxin is high or certain, yeah? And likewise, the conditional probability of not getting the reward given I don't drink the toxin is, because I didn't have the intention to drink the toxin, is low or zero. So that is, we have a decision rule for the right graph, which consists in simply ordinary maximization of conditional expected utility. And this rule, so I propose, then characterizes also the left reflexive decision graph with ancillary effect. And that can be stated in a perfectly general way as a perfectly general decision rule applicable to all such decision graphs. I've only made the most simple example here. And then in the toxin puzzle, the rule indeed dictates an early commitment to drink the toxin as desired. That's the only way how you get the reward. And if you accept that theory of ancillary rationality, as I call it, that has important consequences for the game theory, because game theory is the theory of individual rationality in a social world. That is in situations where other players or persons are engaged. In the graph's representation, again, the simplest two-person game looks like this. That's player one and that's player two. They do something and that has independently of each other, and that has some consequences which they value or do not value. So in any ways, the results depends on both actions, and then that's the standard problem game theory looks at. The basic assumption of so-called non-cooperative games theory, which in turn is the basic part or foundational part of game theory, is the causal independence of the two players in action. So I do something, you do something, and that's causally independent. Of course, we can also model that I do something, you observe what I do, and then you do something, and that would be a different game. That is also treated in non-cooperative game theory, of course. But it's clearly, that's in a way a simpler game. Yeah? The problem is we have a causal independence here. In the given graph, this entails the probabilistic independence of these action nodes. The players have then mutual unconditional beliefs about each other, or probabilities. Because these nodes are so-called exogenous nodes, that is, they have no causal parents, they're exogenous nodes, and then if and exogenous nodes, which are causally independent, are then always also probabilistically independent. That's a consequence of so-called causal base net theorizing. Anyway, a basic theorem of epistemic game theory then says, if this setup and the player's beliefs and utility functions are common knowledge, so I know what your utilities are and what your probabilities are and vice versa and so on, then the beliefs must form a Nash equilibrium, which is characterized by the probabilistic independence of the action nodes. So in the Nash equilibrium, that's the core notion of non-cooperative game theory on which all the theorizing builds. Yeah. Now, note how deceptive this graph representation is. Reflexive ascent tells us that the underlying reflexive gain graph may, but need not, but may look like the upper graph. Yeah? So there's some mental state of player one causing his action there, and there's some mental state of player two causing his action there. And these, of course, we have assumed causal independence between the action nodes. Yeah? But that still allows causal interaction between the mental states. Because our mental states are in permanent mutual interaction. So here the player's decision nodes are causally interdependent. They are, in my former terminology, they are mutual ancillary effects. And then the lower graph, this one here, is considered is the condensed as if version of the upper graph. Note that the red double graph does not represent causal interaction between the action nodes, but is the residual of the common cause relation in the upper graph. Yeah, so we perform the same procedure as I had with the toxin puzzle. Yeah? So that arrow, so we get rid of that decision node, and then that arrow reduces to an arrow there too, yeah? From the action node to that mental state of player two. Yeah? And then we have an indirect causal relation from that action, as if causal relation from that action node to that decision node, and then to that action node. So we can summarize that as an arrow from one to two. Yeah? And likewise the reverse procedure. So that's how that picture is produced in the end. So it is as if the action nodes of the players would mutually causally influence one another. Yeah? But it's only as if. Yeah? And it has a causal background, which is in the upper graph. But what remains then is a probabilistic dependence, simplified by that red double arrow, a probabilistic dependence between the action nodes. Hence, the notion of a Nash equilibrium does not apply, because that presupposes probabilistic independence. And for these more general scenarios, a novel notion of a dependency equilibrium applies. It has, in my view, the same foundational status for these scenarios as Nash equilibria have for the more restricted scenarios. If such a setup, the utilities and the conditional beliefs are common knowledge, these beliefs must form a dependency equilibrium. Now, I don't go to define that notion, that would take us too far. But let's simply look, for concluding the talk, at the famous prisoner's dilemma, which you all know the scenario. You can either incorporate or you can defect. Yeah? And the utilities are here as explained here. So here's the row chooser, here's the column chooser, and the utilities of the row choosers are the first figures, and the utilities of the column choosers are the second figure. And the problem is, of course, look at the row chooser. If he defects, he gets 3 instead of 2 if the other one cooperates, and he gets 1 instead of 0 if the other one defects. That is, you fare better by defecting. In any case, whatever the other one does. And the same applies to the column chooser. So both end up defecting. Yeah? And then they get that result. Each gets 1 utile, so to speak. But they could have fared much better by mutually cooperating, and they would have got 2 utiles each. And that's so individual rationality prevents the socially desirable outcome. And that's why it is a basic problem of social philosophy. Yeah? And you have many exemplifications. So we run into prisoner dilemmas 10 times a day. The point is, Nash equilibrium joint defection is the only Nash equilibrium in that prisoner's dilemma. But there are many dependency equilibria. Joint cooperation is one too. It's not the only one. Of course, the Nash equilibrium is also a dependency equilibrium, but in particular, joint cooperation is a dependency equilibrium, where you have the mutual beliefs that if you cooperate, I cooperate, and if I cooperate, you cooperate, and also if I defect, you defect, and vice versa. And then if you maximize conditional expected utility, if these are your conditional beliefs, then cooperation maximizes conditional expected utility. So now we could engage in a long discussion. We could look at the many unsatisfactory economic efforts to rationalize cooperation. That's a very interesting literature, but it's all problematic. Yeah? They don't really come to terms with that. And let me also emphasize once more how common these more general scenarios are. In the original prisoner's dilemma story, we may assume that the two criminals have formed their mutual conditional beliefs in their long common criminal career. And then they, when separated in their prison cells, they simply stick to these mutual conditional beliefs and do not defect. No? Quite generally, one might say we are all embedded in a large net of social norms in which our decision-relevant mental states are shaped in an interactive way. In this way, dependency equilibria open a novel perspective for social philosophy, for connecting formal game theory with insights others have preached all along. So yeah, it offers a route to a better explanation of what social norms are and how they work. So this ends my brief presentation of how my conception of reflexive rationality may prove to be fruitful and consequential. Thank you very much.